Happy birthday, rebels. Jokes aside, 250 years is not exactly something to sneeze at, but as always, we gotta talk about it. I don't think it's an accident that Americans tend to romanticize, idolize, or demarcate our independence from the Declaration of Independence. I think this speaks to a lot about the American psyche. I think it speaks a lot to the American brand. And as always, I think things like brand and marketing and comms are significant, not just on the world stage, but also to the uniquely American identity that I happen to be a part of. So I'm here today. I have a glass of Prosecco to toast my nation state of origin and also to talk a little bluntly about where I view the American experiment 250-ish years in, the difference between the PR and the reality, and what's going on with America right now, because I'm not sure we're doing okay. Again, if you're new, my priors. I am an American citizen, but I am an immigrant to the UK. My partner and I have lived here now for, I think 13 years, I don't remember, but somewhere between 12 and 15. But before that, I was born in an American territory. I am the child of an American service member who was raised all over the world as a result of this parent's military career. They were an officer in the armed forces. I am the granddaughter of an enlisted person who served in World War II in America's armed forces. I am the sister of an active duty service member today, and I am the sister of another American immigrant to a different country in Japan. I was raised both in the United States and also outside of the United States, including its territories. And I'm really grateful for that experience. I think it's allowed me to develop a layered and nuanced view of my own country. And I want to be clear, I do consider myself patriotic. I love my nation. I love the identity that being an American gives me. But I'm also able to view my nation through a critical lens because, to be clear, if you are obliged to love something without criticizing it, you are at best in an abusive relationship and at worst in a cult. And I am neither. I genuinely love America. I love being an American. I appreciate being an American. And I also am able to look at my home nation through the lens of being an immigrant to another country, through the lens of someone who intends to pursue dual citizenship in my adopted nation. As someone who's now lived a significant portion, I think the majority of my life outside of the United States of America, and who has chosen to build a life as an international, being an American citizen abroad, a global citizen, if you will, looking in at America from the vantage point of an external perspective. I'm also a comms, marketing, PR, media girl. So that's how I tend to view a lot of the world and the lens through which I view a lot of messaging, media, and just perspectives anyway. So as you probably know, today is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And this is the landmark through which a lot of Americans view the founding of our nation. And to be blunt, this is where a lot of our problems start. Let me be clear. I think the Declaration of Independence is a marvel of writing. It is a piece of written rhetoric that distills so many of the psychological, social, political, economic, whatever philosophies that came out of the Enlightenment and landed at the precise moment where a bunch of people were looking around and wondering, do things have to be this way? And the answer a lot of them boldly came to was, no, we can choose differently. That is hugely significant in the course of human history, in the course of human events, if you will. I think that Thomas Jefferson wrote a genuinely and unironically revolutionary document when he and his committee of helpers, of course, put together and agreed upon the Declaration of Independence. It was a rejection of monarchy, which of course has dominated the human experience for the better part of 6,000 recorded years. It was also therefore the rejection of feudalism. Hi, Flo. Dog sitting again. It was also the rejection of feudalism, which was a system of relationships that militarily and economically bound different groups of people to one another. It was further a rejection of mercantilist imperialism, which was the system through which the British Empire rose to prominence and was, bluntly, the predominant power in global affairs for the better part of 2 centuries. It was and remains a hugely significant text in the course of human history. And I don't think any other nation or nascent nation, try saying that 3 times fast, could have come up with it the way that the American colonists did. I'd also argue that, again, using my professional lens, that the Declaration of Independence is very much the pitch deck. It is the idea. It is the big concept. It is the bold statement of intention without any sort of backing plan of how to bring it about. Which, again, is very on brand, I think, for Americans who want to demarcate our big histories. We like to celebrate our big ideas, our big statements, our PR, if you will, when the messy reality of American history, of course, the moment you start looking at it a little bit more, gets a lot messier real quick. The Declaration of Independence was not the establishment of the American nation state by any stretch. That took years and multiple drafts. We don't tend to talk about it, but before there was the American Constitution, there was the Articles of Confederation, which was the first attempt of several colonies who had at that point established their independence from Great Britain through violent conflict, trying desperately to get along with one another. A theme that I would argue has continued in American political life ever since. But the Articles of Confederation failed in their initial objective, which is why, a new Congress or a new committee had to be convened to come up with something different, another set of laws and standards through which to govern. As much as I genuinely admire the Declaration of Independence for its intellectual achievement as a piece of historical writing and text, as just, in many ways, the culmination of the Enlightenment, politically speaking, I personally don't really consider it the founding of America. I think you have to look to the establishment of the United States Constitution for that. The Declaration of Independence was our statement of intent. The Constitution of America was our actual plan of how to be a new nation state on the world stage, established through self-determination, a radical concept. And, of course, an incomplete one. It's not lost on me, recording this the week that I am, that the Constitution has literally been a point of contention from the moment we kind of agreed on it. The Constitution itself is a document that was designed in its creation to be amended, to be changed. But a huge part of the American political project right now is the continuous debate and power struggle between what the writers and drafters of the Constitution meant at the time versus how we should interpret it now. Suffice it to say, I am not an originalist, and I don't think anyone can be to a document that built into itself the provision for change and development. All of which is to say is that America has always been messy. There tends to be in the American mythology the idea of a golden age. Some people date it to the founding, a mythological past where the founders laid forth a perfect version of government. I disagree. There are religious overtones to this, where some groups in America of various religious and non-religious stripes tend to view the American founding documents as something like scripture. Things that were either divinely inspired, in some cases literally, or are the ultimate version of their reality, completely disregarding the rest of the world and how many variations and versions of democracy have come after, some deeply, deeply imperfect and dangerous, and others probably doing a better job of what I would consider the founders' intent than what we have achieved. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that Americans themselves have never really agreed on what America is or should be. And anyone who says that they did is lying to you or marketing to you. The Declaration of Independence was the PR, the Constitution is the reality, and the Constitution is what we continue to argue about to this day. That's not a bad thing in my opinion. I don't tend to be doctrinaire about most things in life, but the political debates that Americans are having, literally at time of recording, stem from our foundational documents from the 1780s, and possibly, you could argue, some of the aspects of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. When I try to explain Americans and America to outsiders, I tend to quip that we are not one country. We are 50 separate countries trying desperately to get along with one another. And I stand by that. America is not one thing. We are big. We are physically, geographically big. We are separated into regions. We were settled and colonized in fits and starts. We've had different waves of immigration, which have affected our sense of identity and selfhood, and have also affected how we view otherness, something I think that is highly relevant to American politics today. You know, we bluntly speaking have I would not hesitate to say, racist administration, an anti-immigrant administration in charge of things right now. And I don't get it, man. Using my own heritage just by way of example, on one parent's side, I am descended from mostly Scottish and Welsh immigrants to America who largely came to America as part of a religious extremist group, 19th century Mormonism. On that parent's side, I am descended from literal pioneer sheep herders in the mountains of Utah, and particularly who later emigrated to southern Utah. And again, in my heritage, I count both Mormon and Mormon sympathetic family members who emigrated to America to be part of that theocratic settler project before it was reintegrated into the United States of America. On the other side, my other parent is literally half and half WASP, privileged white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, from Tarrytown, New York, who then chose to marry the daughter of Slovakian immigrants, who themselves were Roman Catholic and didn't speak English, and came to America in the early 20th century when there was a particular wave of Slovakian immigration. To the best of my knowledge, my Slovakian great-grandparent worked in the coal mines. And my great-grandmother was a charwoman. And their daughter married the son of a very wealthy family. But in exchange, she had to give up her Slovakian family and immigrant heritage, and I believe had to convert to Protestantism in order to marry my grandfather. I am a mutt, and so is every other American alive. I am descended from people who, in another day and age, might not have been considered white. Because unless we forget, in America, a lot of immigrants were not considered white even though they were European until the 1950s. If you go back to the 19th century and you look at some of the political cartoons of the era, it is not uncommon to see Irish immigrants depicted with the same physiological traits as African Americans. And this is because the Irish were considered subhuman, or at least a devolved version of humans, by many of the race scientists of their day, who of course gave us eugenics and Nazis later. Later, Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans, again, like my forebears, were also not considered the right kind of European for many, many moons. Italians were not considered white to the 1950s either. So this idea that there has ever been an acceptable kind of European immigrant is a fallacy. The idea that there has ever been an acceptable kind of class of people has been a fallacy. America has been a constant argument about who it is, who constitutes its makeup, what should qualify them for American status from the get-go. Even people who would have been considered white immigrants in the 19th and early 20th century, like Germans, were treated with extreme hostility in the early 20th century, thanks to, 2 world wars. They were considered un-American at the time. Don't even get me started on how the Jewish community has been treated in America historically. It's appalling. And of course, our indigenous populations have been treated with outright imperialism and hostility to the point of near eradication. Who gets to be an American and on what grounds? And the debates thereof are possibly the most quintessential American thing possible. It's been happening quite literally since we started. And this is why, looking at America right now as we celebrate 250 years from a global perspective is genuinely fascinating. Because again, I feel like I'm an insider, but I'm looking from the outside in. We're doing a lot wrong, guys. This isn't to excuse the very real problems that I think Britain has at the moment, that I think other Western democracies are facing, that the whole Enlightenment project is facing in post-modernity in the 21st century. A lot of our values and ideals, as established perhaps in the Declaration of Independence and later enshrined in the Constitution in law, have not really scaled to deal with the problems that we face. Americans like to talk about free speech and media, and we have 200 years of case law to back it up, but I would argue our founders never considered what it would mean to have media and speech that could be transmitted to literal billions of people in seconds, because when the Constitution and the Bill of Rights was established, we didn't have billions of people on the planet. It was literally inconceivable to them. Moving right into the Second Amendment, I don't think the founders could have conceptualized what it meant to have automatic firearms. Moving on to the Fourth Amendment, I don't think the founders could have conceptualized that I would have a device that I could hold in the palm of my hand that would contain all of my data for the better part of a decade. My personal life, all of my private affairs, and all of my communication. The problem of scale has been one that we've been arguing about for a long time now, but that's part of the reason why I'm not an originalist. I still believe in a lot of the principles, but I think that part of the problem and the privilege of democracy is continuing to argue with what those principles mean in an ever-evolving and changing world. To me, at least, the most powerful aspects of Western democracy, which were genuinely pioneered by the American experiment, is the ability to revisit the question, to determine if something has changed in our material reality, and therefore, how do we incorporate that new material reality alongside our values. To me, going back to the concept of PR in the first place, America has always been an idea. It has been a set of ideals. And the most positive version of the story of America that I tell myself and that I personally think can be told is one of a deeply, deeply flawed and imperfect nation, always getting closer and closer to the ideals it claims. The same nation that wrote that all men are endowed with inalienable rights is the same nation that believed in slavery and was probably one of the more brutal examples of chattel slavery in the Western world, and had to fight an actual civil war to resolve the question of whether or not the right to own people could be allowed to continue to exist. I'm comfortable with that contradiction, personally. I don't think I need to make a choice between the nation that said all men are created equal and the nation that had to fight a war to end chattel slavery. I think both happening is part of my history and part of the legal political heritage to which I'm an inheritor. The same man who wrote those words famously owned slaves and had the half-sister of his dead wife as an enslaved concubine. Suboptimal Jefferson. And the same nation and the same ideals and the same concepts that produced him also produced Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers and a lot of other variations on the and John Brown. Like, America doesn't have to be perfect to be good. And I don't think it has to be good right now to be worth celebrating. Which is good for me because I don't think we're very good right now. At the time of our 250th anniversary, I think America is going through one of its many and periodic bouts of identity crisis. We've been in an identity crisis since the 18th century. Why stop now? There are so many aspects of the American experiment and the ideas that form America. The idea itself that you don't have to have a certain genealogy, a certain genetic or cultural heritage, a certain religious confederation in order to belong to something. The idea that you can choose to join in to a community and to integrate with it and to accept its mission and its values as yours is fundamentally American to me and is deeply, deeply powerful. And I don't think there's another nation on earth that has that in its core self-concept in the same way. And as someone who has very much embedded those values within her, that's how I choose to move through the world. I fully intend on becoming a dual citizen of Britain at some point, and I'd argue it's because of my American identity and my American heritage and my belief that I can opt into a nation's identity and project that I can even conceptualize of something like that, and I'm deeply grateful for it. America is a fractious nation with a fractious history of different groups of people constantly in argument of who gets to be considered part of the group. And I'm not blind to the overlaps of that and the worst versions of its character. I talk all the time about how the project of fascism is determining who gets to be in the in-group, but so is the project of democracy in many ways. And holding those two sides of your identity in self-awareness, I think, is more important than it's ever been 250 years in. And as I joke all the time, there is quite literally a cheese shop around the corner from where my husband works that is older than America. I have been to pubs that are older than America. I have walked through doors that are older than America. And for all of that, I don't think our youth and inexperience as a nation state is disqualifying for things like genuine patriotism or pride. It is possible to be fundamentally good and fundamentally flawed. It is possible to be extremely high in your ideals and extremely low in your execution. It is possible to have amazing PR with a kind of faulty product underneath. It is possible to lose your way as a collective, as a group project, if you will. And I think more Americans, frankly, need to read some history to understand that we have lost our way many, many, many times. And we have had to continuously contend with what our values are versus how they appear in the world versus how they appear in our legal or economic systems. And we get it wrong constantly. But getting it wrong and being wrong is also not intrinsic to being bad. In fact, the best story I think can be told of America, like I said, is of a nation that constantly gets it wrong, that constantly falls short, that constantly fucks it all up, and yet has enshrined within its founding idea and its founding documents the capacity to do better. And that is the enlightenment at its finest. That is the ideals of democracy and self-representation and self-actualization at its finest. And I'm proud of that. So, happy birthday-ish, fellow Yanks. Let's do this again when the Constitution's anniversary rolls around, yes? But in the meantime, please enjoy the fireworks on my behalf. We get those on Guy Fawkes Night. A very different celebration of representative government, don't you agree? But also, if you're feeling down about the state of America, as I often am and do, maybe take this as an opportunity to remember the achievements of the experiment. If you are not American but tend to view us broadly fondly, if critically, cheers, babes. Also, from one self-professed fan of democracy to another, we've gotten through bad times before. We've gotten through imperfect times before. We have chosen, as Abraham Lincoln put it, the better angels of our nature before. And if you are at all optimistic about humans as a species, as I try to be, you have to trust that, to quote Winston Churchill, Americans end up doing the right thing even if they have to exhaust their other options first. Love you, babes.